I'm getting more and more confident that ultimately we will be able to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease.
There is knowledge now that we couldn't have even imagined a decade ago.
The ADDF really changed the entire research field for Alzheimer's.
The number of innovative medicines that are in the clinic is greater than ever before.
4 years ago, more than 50% of what we were funding was preclinical. Just in the last year now, 88% of what we're funding is clinical.
And I'm confident that in the next year, certainly within the next 5 years, we're going to have really innovative drugs on the market to treat Alzheimer's disease.
We are on the verge right now of a blood test that will diagnose Alzheimer's.
For once, there's a future we can touch.
You look at what we now know in prevention, what people can do today, right now, that can improve and preserve their cognitive health.
One of the things that I have loved about working in the Alzheimer's disease field is all of the women that are in leadership roles. It makes us more collaborative, and I think it brings the patient and the caregiver voice to the table.
4 years ago, I came into the organization and we had these wonderful Hope on the Horizon events. And I look back at the last 6 to 12 to 18 months and it's as if literally hope is here now.
Welcome. I'm Paula Zahn, and I'm honored to be with you virtually for the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation's annual Fall Luncheon and Symposium featuring the Melvin R. Goods Prize and the Charles Evans Award. The ADDF revolves around one simple mission: to accelerate the discovery of drugs to treat, prevent, and ultimately cure Alzheimer's disease. We are excited to share some of the latest breakthroughs that bring us closer to that goal. With recent developments in new diagnostics, such as the tau blood test, encouraging results from repurposed drug programs, and clinical trials exploring novel drug targets that continue to gain traction, we are fulfilling many of our initial goals and hopes. This is the first year we're combining two of ADDF's signature events for a morning of science, celebration, and recognition. Today, we'll hear from renowned scientists from across the globe, including this year's Goods Prize recipient, Dr. Jerry Rook, whose novel discovery work in the lab has progressed into a phase 1 clinical trial for her proposed Alzheimer's treatment. And we'll also explore some of the inspiring stories behind the Goods Prize and its recipients, featuring ADDF board member and longtime supporter Nancy Goods, and the award's namesake, former Warner Lambert CEO Chairman and honorary member of the ADDF's Board of Governors, Mel Goods. Mel has helped bring Alzheimer's out of the shadows by speaking publicly about his diagnosis in 2010. And he and Nancy are making a tremendous difference in the lives of so many people through their tremendous generosity and commitment to finding a cure. Last but certainly not least, we will be joined by some very special guests to honor Larry Leeds, an extraordinary Alzheimer's advocate, supporter, and longtime friend with the Charles Evans Award. We are grateful to have the opportunity to come together and recognize the critical support of our ADDF friends and family, especially during these challenging and unpredictable times. This includes our executive chairs, Leonard and Ronald Lauder, our honorary chairs, Bonnie Pfeiffer Evans, Nancy Goods, and Alice Shore, our co-chairs, Pamela Newman, Sharon Sager, David Weinreb, and our entire host committee. We also thank all of our supporters, especially our breakthrough, discovery, and innovation sponsors. Your generosity advances some of the most exciting and important research in the field. For those of you who have not supported the event yet, we hope that you will consider doing so by making a donation by texting ADDF to 243-725. And remember, 100% of your donation goes directly towards science. And now, let's explore the inspiration behind the Melvin R. Goods Prize and the incredible work it makes possible.
In 2015, we worked with ADDF to launch what is formerly known as the Melvin R. Goods Prize. The impetus was the reality that outstanding, groundbreaking scientists almost always go unheralded. Our goal is to help fund the bridge between research and a potential drug ready for testing in the clinic.
The award is named for Mel Goods, who is a legend in the pharmaceutical industry for not only bringing Lipitor to market, but also for bringing the first drug approved by the FDA for Alzheimer's disease, a drug called Tacrin. His work in the pharmaceutical industry saved millions of lives.
In 2009, Mel was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He came home from a golf game one day and was very upset because he was accused of cheating. He couldn't remember his golf score. And at that point, we decided it was time to go public with his diagnosis. There was no reason to hide. Through mutual friends that had a connection at Rockefeller University, we were told the go-to guy was Dr. Howard Phillip. Well, 1 week after that conversation, Howard was sitting in our living room. And 1 week after that, Leonard Lauder came calling. And if you know Leonard, you never say no. And from that moment on, we were all in. Mel was asked to speak at the ADDF annual luncheon. It was so brave of him, and I couldn't have been prouder.
I don't expect biomedical science to ride to my rescue. But I will go out a happy man if we can change the course of this disease for the hundreds of millions of people who will soon be at risk. All of us in this room can help to make this happen. Let's keep the hope alive with our generosity, our passion, and our spirit. Thank you very much.
It was one of his last speeches, and he was being so positive about this whole situation. It was very inspiring to see how he was diagnosed but was still able to recognize that he was going to fight through this and do anything he could.
He is bigger than the disease. He continues to light up a room. He still makes people laugh, and he's always welcoming to family and friends, even if he doesn't remember who they are.
Whenever I go to visit him, you can always see his personality through everything he does. He's still engaging in conversations. He's still trying his best. And whenever I'm just like struggling or doing something that's hard and I just want to give up, he'll cross my mind about how he's pushing through all these challenges, and it just inspires me to do better.
He's grateful to the wonderful people who care for him, and he is always the most generous and thoughtful.
It's more than enough for anybody who is touched by Alzheimer's, for a spouse like Nancy who's taking care of everything, all of his needs. That's more than enough of where your energy goes. But Nancy didn't stop there. She wants to do something about making sure other families don't need to go through this.
I want to feel like our family's experience can be turned into something that has a permanent positive effect on millions of people around the world. ADDF provides that to me, so that all the suffering of people like my parents and Mel will not have been in vain.
Since its founding in 2015, the Melvin R. Goods Prize has gone on to support some of the brightest and best innovators in Alzheimer's research. Today, we're thrilled to check in on two of our ADDF All-Stars, Dr. Frank Longo and Dr. Michaela Gallagher, who will share how the Goods Prize has been instrumental in furthering critical research and clinical trials.
The 6 winners to date of the Goods Prize have all been innovators, and all 6 have drugs for Alzheimer's disease that are currently in clinical trials for human beings.
I've been interested in degeneration of the brain and coming up with new treatments for brain problems for a long time. I grew up with a sister who had some brain damage at birth, unfortunately. And from when I was a young child, I was interested in creating therapies that would make the brain better.
These drugs that Frank has could be useful not only for Alzheimer's, but for many other neurological disorders.
We came into this with a completely novel and creative approach. We weren't going after amyloid. Since we were so fortunate to win the inaugural Goods Prize in 2015, it's allowed us to better understand the mechanisms by which our drug works, and that's absolutely critical for moving further in human studies. And second, it's allowed us to build a much stronger intellectual property portfolio around our therapy, and that's also critical to advance further in human trials in an industry setting to get the treatment to patients. We're currently wrapping up our phase 2A trial in patients with mild to moderate Alzheimer's disease, and of course ADDF is one of the entities that helped make this trial possible. So we are delighted that we've finished treatment of all the patients in the trial, and we hope to have that data analyzed by the end of this calendar year.
Michaela Gallagher has one of the very few drugs in phase 3 today for Alzheimer's disease, and one of the only drugs that's not an amyloid program.
Alzheimer's disease is driven by neural overactivity, and we have a drug that decreases that overactivity back to normal. What we're testing in our clinical trial now over a longer period of time is that by lowering this excessive neural activity, you can arrest or greatly slow progression or the worsening of the Alzheimer's disease.
If the drug works, it'll be probably the first drug to come to market for the treatment of mild cognitive impairment. And if we can treat MCI, we might delay or prevent the progression to dementia, where people become really impaired.
If you could slow progression in mild cognitive impairment to a clinical diagnosis of dementia by 3 years, you would decrease the prevalence of people with dementia by 30%. The Goods Prize was awarded to me in 2018, and that was at a really critical moment in the development of our research program. We used some of that funding to develop the technology within our late-stage clinical trial to actually use tau imaging of the human brain, its localization and spread, which we could then measure over the course of treatment to see if our therapeutic, by lowering this heightened activity, would slow or restrain the spread of tau in the brain. So that was a great timing. It really influenced the direction of the trial.
On behalf of the ADDF and the Goods family, we are pleased to present the 6th Annual Goods Prize to Dr. Jerry Rook. Here's a look at Dr. Rook's work and the excitement it's generating.
Dr. Rook and her work at Vanderbilt really represents the best of what ADDF is all about. We started funding her in 2014. She had unique research that was preclinical, and that program we were funding her with was developing her science, but also helping to develop how to teach her and the folks at Vanderbilt how to commercialize, how to get into clinic. Our most recent investment in Dr. Rook at Vanderbilt now is for a clinical trial. It is on a novel compound or drug that is trying to slow the progression of dementia and Alzheimer's, and really it's kind of mind-blowing.
So the compound that we're currently taking into clinical trials is called VU319. It is a small molecule that is used to increase the activity of a chemical in the brain called acetylcholine, and this chemical in the brain is significantly diminished in Alzheimer's patients. And so what we're using this compound to do is to fine-tune the activity of the brain, increase these brain activities that are diminished in Alzheimer's disease, and then restore their normal learning and memory. And so it maintains normal brain activity as opposed to other compounds previously that would enter the brain, activate all of these targets in the brain in excess. And excessive activation of these areas in the brain then result in toxic side effects. So what we want to do is focus on this one target that we know is essential in learning and memory, and only activate that one target.
Dr. Rook's work is so important because she has been going after a target that the field has considered to be very important for improving cognitive function.
These are really fairly brilliant ways of modifying or modulating the activity of the brain without messing up its information processing.
We have seen no safety or toxicology issues in our human patients, our healthy human adults, and we are continuing to progress this program then into Alzheimer's patients.
As a result of her work and the work of others at Vanderbilt, Vanderbilt did a licensing deal for $515 million with a biotech company called Acadia Pharmaceuticals. And Acadia will take the baton and develop Dr. Rook's drug further into phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials.
This is why the ADDF exists, to take novel ideas when they're kind of these crazy, interesting, nobody else is touching these ideas, and then nurture them through the process till like ultimately we can go from bench to bedside with effective treatments for people with cognitive issues like dementia and Alzheimer's.
I'm still, I think, a little in shock and awe that I was chosen to be a recipient of the award. Extremely grateful to the Goods family as well as the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. I'm really excited about the opportunity to hopefully continue Melvin's legacy and honor him and his tremendous dedication to drug discovery research in an effort to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease.
Now, it's my great honor and privilege to introduce ADDF co-founders and co-chairmen Leonard and Ronald Lauder. Because of the model they created with the ADDF, they have allowed the organization to assume risk that others would not bear. Their keen business sense has inspired the ADDF strategy to pursue solutions to this dreaded disease from multiple angles. And their unwavering commitment has enabled the ADDF to help bring unprecedented hope that we can delay and eventually conquer this disease. To date, the ADDF has invested more than $150 million to support a robust, diverse pipeline with 626 Alzheimer's drug discovery programs and clinical trials in 19 countries. We are beginning a new era in Alzheimer's research, possibilities that would have been nearly unimaginable just 10 years ago. I'm thrilled to welcome Leonard and Ronald.
Our grandmother and my aunt, my mother's sister, both had a serious case of Alzheimer's. That was a wake-up call for us, which is, if it's in the family, it is our job to try to help our family and others prevent and cure this dreadful disease. And we joined forces, joined arms together, and have been at it over 20 years. I'm proud to be my brother's partner. I'm proud to be able to work with him on this. The Lauder family covers all the overhead of the ADDF organization, all of it. So that means that every penny, nickel, dime, and dollar that you give to today's luncheon goes directly to research and goes directly to the world.
Without your help, we would never have reached where we are now, which is the beginning of the end of Alzheimer's. We now have biomarkers, and we can tell very early if someone has it. And also, we know now some of the things we can do to prevent it.
It's no longer a hidden secret that, oh, don't talk about this. We all talk about it. And because we talk about it, we have found the world opening up to us. And more and more researchers around the world saying they have something special. Can we invest in it and help bring it to market? And it has worked extraordinarily well. Thank you, and thank you all for making this such an important event and helping bring us closer to a complete prevention and a complete cure.
He's a good brother. Thank you all.
A signature element of the Fall Luncheon is the Scientific Symposium, which creates an opportunity for leading scientists to come together and share recent advances in Alzheimer's research with the ADDF community. This year, for the second year in a row, we're pleased to welcome an esteemed panel of female scientists, all of whom are making significant strides in the field. Please join me in welcoming our 2020 Goods Prize recipient, Dr. Jerry Rook of Vanderbilt University, along with Dr. Susan Catalano of Cognition Therapeutics and Dr. Charlotte Tennyson of VU University Medical Center in Amsterdam, and recipient of funding through the ADDF's Diagnostic Accelerator.
Welcome, everyone. Our audience was introduced to Dr. Rook's work earlier in today's program, and now we're going to hear more from Drs. Catalano and Tennyson about their scientific efforts.
I'm the founder and chief science officer of Cognition Therapeutics. We are a Pittsburgh-based company that has discovered a drug that has the possibility of stopping or slowing Alzheimer's disease. It works by a completely novel mechanism of action that's never been tried before in Alzheimer's therapeutics history. The drug is in 4 phase 2 trials. The drug works by interacting with synapses, which are the points of electrical communication between 2 brain cells. And the electrical communication between those brain cells is responsible for memory formation. And the mechanisms underlying that memory formation are what's impacted most profoundly in Alzheimer's disease. So the drug, CT1812, actually protects these synapses from impact by the toxins that build up in the brain with age and cause Alzheimer's disease. We've got preliminary results from the very first group of patients to be treated for 6 months with the drug, and it shows a trend towards slowing cognitive decline and impact on cognitive decline. ADDF funding has been absolutely instrumental in providing excellent peer review validation of the science behind the drug. ADDF support has been incredibly instrumental by bringing together a group of scientists, literally the world's top Alzheimer's and neurodegeneration researchers, to look at our science and ultimately support our science.
The focus of my research is on body fluid biomarkers. What does that mean? Biomarkers are molecules that we can measure in body fluids, such as blood or cerebrospinal fluid. And a very good example of a biomarker is, for example, the measurement of glucose to identify whether a person has diabetes. And especially in neurological diseases, we need biomarkers. And that's because we can't see the symptoms for a long time before they appear. But during this long time, during which the disease already develops, there are changes in the body fluids. So therefore, we need the biomarkers to define whether someone has a neurological disease. And even more so, we need the biomarkers also to define whether a treatment is effective. We are grateful for a grant that we obtained from the ADDF in the course of the Diagnostic Accelerator program to develop novel biomarkers for Alzheimer's disease. And we are especially looking for novel biomarker tests that can help also identify whether someone has Alzheimer's or not. In addition, in our studies, we're developing tests to be able to monitor the effect of treatments and also to predict whether someone will decline in the future.
Let's begin our discussion with a question for all of the panel. I'm wondering what each of you is most excited about in terms of the future of Alzheimer's disease today.
I think the most exciting aspect of Alzheimer's drug discovery research right now is just the diversity of all of the targets and all of the projects that are out there. I do think it's going to take a multifaceted approach to treat Alzheimer's disease and to hopefully slow the progression of the disease and find a cure.
As Jerry said, the range of targets that we're looking at is really unprecedented. It really was never the case in previous years that targets such as ours, a first-in-class target that's actually never been tried before in the clinic, would have been considered. But here we are.
And I think what's also very fantastic, that there is also a collaborative environment, that multiple groups work together globally, and maybe it's even improved due to Zoom and the COVID pandemic, that we're able to really communicate with each other easily, face to face and instantly also. And I think that bringing all those minds together is also very important.
Ironically, one of the things that was really accelerated as a result of the global pandemic is innovation in ways to remotely measure how the patients are doing, both on the biology side of things, as well as their cognitive abilities and their everyday life. So these methods have gotten a big boost towards the very crucial clinical validation that they need to be incorporated formally into trials, to be approved as endpoints by the regulatory agencies here and abroad. So that's a very welcome development.
Due to the pandemic, it was very important that patients are not visiting the clinic as frequently, but still they should be monitored very well. So, and there was also a problem with the availability of MRI scans, for example. They were also needed for the COVID departments. So, and there the blood test really shows that we can employ such tests for neurological disease. And sometimes people are reluctant to embrace novel technologies, but now due to the pandemic, it has really accelerated really the implementation of such tests.
Ironically, you're speaking about a very positive outcome that's resulted from the COVID pandemic on research in terms of promoting innovation in telemedicine and the use of telehealth and clinical trials. Jerry, at a university, I know COVID's also affected basic research and animal research and maybe even chemistry.
We have been able to, thankfully, get our programs back up and running. But we also then switched to, like we've all been discussing, these online technologies that's really helped facilitate all of our discussions. It's also created an environment where you're not hesitant to reach out to someone who's not within your group to set up a Zoom meeting or MS Teams or whatever your preferred platform is, to interact with each other. And I think that's kind of expedited those collaborative efforts.
The effects of the pandemic, do you think that, or do you also see that there is some reluctance now of novel investors to invest in Alzheimer's disease, and that they move to COVID, or they are a bit more reluctant because we are awaiting a crisis? Do you think it negatively impacts the future of novel drugs of Alzheimer's disease?
Actually, I don't think COVID will really have a long-term impact on our work. But I think there's investors that are realizing that the time is right to start investing in Alzheimer's. And we're beginning to see investors investing in biotech companies and doing a lot more startups to get the field forward. I think that investors and governments have realized that we need to solve this problem because COVID will come and go, but Alzheimer's disease will bankrupt our societies and destroy our families if we don't find effective drugs to prevent and treat it. Okay, Susan, you're on. When do you think we'll know one way or another whether your drug works and goes into phase 3?
In the beginning of next year, in just a few short months, we'll be looking at additional groups of patients who've been treated with the drug for anywhere between 6 months and 1 year. And we'll take a look at how the biology of the disease changed in these patients. And we'll also be looking at how they do on their activities of daily living and how they do in their cognitive performance as well. And so if what we saw in the initial group of patients really continues to hold out, we'll be really not only excited, but also well-positioned to go into a very large phase 2 study that we received ADDF support for and NIH support for.
Hi, Charlotte. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
How do you think the blood tests, like for the amyloid protein that correlates with the plaques or the tau protein that correlates with the tangles. How do you see that they might be used in clinical practice soon?
We anticipate and we work towards using it as a pre-screener. So you can screen a lot of people that are anxious to undergo lumbar puncture, and you can simply send in a blood test and then screen whether someone has an elevated risk to develop Alzheimer's disease. And after that you will do additional testing to really confirm that someone has Alzheimer's disease. But using such kinds of blood tests, you can avoid that testing for people that are negative. So it's a very powerful tool.
And what's the difference between the information that you get from the blood amyloid test from the blood tau test? What's the difference in what they're telling you in terms of predicting risk and what the patient looks like and so on?
And these are very important questions that need to be answered now. But my guess is that the amyloid will be a very early stage predictor, and that the tau will probably predict the cognitive decline. And that's my prediction just based on what we observed so far in the cerebrospinal fluid, how these two proteins can be complementary to each other and give complementary information. But that's something that we will know better in a year or so.
Jerry, you've had an interesting, fascinating career in academia developing drugs. Could you speak to some of the challenges you've faced as a drug discoverer in an academic setting?
Drug discovery research is an extremely expensive and often complicated endeavor. So we help navigate that by developing tool compounds within the same program that those compounds would never really have the legs to make it into the clinic and be a drug, but they're an excellent resource for really delving deep into the biology of our target and of the disease pathology of our interest. So we use those tool compounds, and we're able to publish a lot with those. And that is able to bring in a lot of financial interests. And then of course, you know, we are actively always seeking external funding. With this program, we were successful in doing that, you know, through you and the Alzheimer's Drug Discovery Foundation. In addition to the Harrington Discovery Institute Scholars Award that we had through your partnership with the HDI. You've made comments numerous times, Howard, about how we've cured Alzheimer's disease in a mouse, you know, thousands of times, but unfortunately we were unable to translate those therapies into humans. You know, what are your focuses going to be for the Alzheimer's drug discovery and for your career moving forward to try to help us, you know, navigate our deficits in that specific area?
Our scientific strategy at ADDF is to understand, to be knowledgeable about the biology of aging and apply those gerontological principles to developing drugs for Alzheimer's disease, because Alzheimer's disease is a disease of aging and old age. And I think that's part of why we come to this diversity of targets. Well, what we're really interested in is testing these drugs in humans, seeing what happens in human beings, using the biomarkers to understand and to understand the impact of a drug. But I really think that doing experimental medicine is going to really help us to move forward. And when you look back at cancer research, for example, that was really what happened, was that drugs were tried, even though we didn't even know all their mechanisms of action. Clinicians had the courage to try drugs on people and see what happens. That's why we're willing to take risk. We currently have 25 clinical trials going on. Half of them are repurposing. And you know, we want to know what's going on, what's going to happen in clinical trials with these novel drugs. We're very proud to have an all-female panel today. And I'm very proud of being able to do that and of all of your accomplishment. But did you face any particular challenges as female scientists and clinicians in moving and advancing your work forward?
I'm one of the very few women scientists who've ever lived who've had a chance to realize their vision for discovering and developing treatments that can stop a disease that really has no treatments. So I'm very fortunate that I've had support from my peers, from my colleagues, male and female, that's been really instrumental going forward, as well as organizations like the ADDF and the NIH that have really stood behind high quality science and helped with these diverse approaches to really stopping this disease.
I've been very fortunate to interact with foundations like the ADDF, as well as have peers, both male and female, who support women in science. But I would still say that we are in the uphill battle, but at least we're moving forward.
So within academia, at the higher positions, there are fewer females, and especially in the Netherlands, that is also so, or maybe even a bit worse than in many other countries. But that's being changed now also by some programs to promote women. But during my own career, I've also been always been in departments where females had an equal role, and it was also very balanced departments, balanced distribution. But nowadays in our lab, the lab heads, so a similar position as I am, they are all females. So we're skewing in the other direction nowadays. So I think it really has changed.
Well, I want to thank the panel for a great discussion. There's always so much more to discuss, and the good news is that we're not quite finished. Please stay tuned for the special question and answer session, which will reunite us all live to answer your viewer questions.
Hi, everybody. This is Howard Phillott again, and I want to welcome you to the live Q&A, question and answer, and we're going to give the audience a chance to ask our panelists and Dr. Rook, our Goods Prize winner, some questions. But before I do, I have some really exciting breaking news for everyone. Yesterday, we talked a little bit about biomarkers in the previous session. Yesterday, a company that we've been invested in for several years named C2N, which was spun out of Washington University in St. Louis, announced the first commercial blood test on the market in the history of the world. And in my opinion, this is just amazing. If somebody had asked me 5 years ago if we'd ever have a blood test for Alzheimer's disease, I just would have been very skeptical. And now we have one, and I'm very proud to say that ADDF played a role in the development of that blood test and bringing it to market. Imagine that now somebody with memory problems who's really concerned about it can go to the doctor's office, primary care doctor, neurology, geriatrician, psychiatry, and get a blood test, just like you do for diabetes, and find out if you have Alzheimer's disease. I mean, it's just incredible, and I think it's going to really mainstream our work in clinical care, and it's also going to accelerate clinical trials. Dr. Tennyson, you are a panel expert on biomarkers. First question for you is, what do you think about this commercialization? It's just an amazing event in my mind.
Yes, I completely agree. It's a really exciting development. So it also shows that we can now measure Alzheimer blood biomarkers in blood, Alzheimer core biomarkers, so really the core pathologies. So it's an amazing development. So I do think that this opens the door to future developments also. But indeed, as you said, for trial development, it's so important. But also now in clinical care, for people that are reluctant to undergo a lumbar puncture, they can now do a blood test. And then for part of them, we can reassure them it's not Alzheimer's. And for part of them with a positive blood test, you can do extra screening. So it really leads to a lower hurdle to undergo Alzheimer diagnostics and better information for the patients.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Jerry, Dr. Rook, we're so excited about your work, and I know you've been working on this for so many years, and we talked about your role in the academic world, but your program was recently licensed to a biotech company called Acadia for $515 million in milestone payments. That's an incredible advance also. And, it sort of speaks to the partnership, the public-private partnership between academia and industry here to develop drugs. Could you talk a little bit about the handoff there and what this means for bringing your drug to market?
Yeah,
absolutely. So it's a really exciting time for our program. And as you said, we recently licensed the program with Acadia Pharmaceuticals. The program now has been handed off to Acadia as far as advancing the clinical trials. We conducted the first clinical trials in phase 1 healthy volunteers here at Vanderbilt. The cost of that is about $1.5 million. But as we progress through these clinical trials, the cost for clinical trials can get up to $100 million. And so that's why it was really essential at this point in time for us to partner with a pharmaceutical company. And so they're going to continue to advance these clinical trials through our phase 2 and then phase 3. I'm extremely hopeful that we can get through that process in the next 5 or 7 years and ideally have a drug in the market within this decade. And for our role here at Vanderbilt, then what we're doing is focusing on developing additional compounds as a backup in case there are any speed bumps that we encounter along the way in the clinic. We have another drug poised and ready to go to take its place moving forward.
Thank you. Dr. Catalano, we have a question from the audience. Your drug not only targets preventing amyloid toxicity, but it's also targeting the synapses, as you mentioned. And Dr. Longo also talked about targeting the synapses. So the question is, what's the similarity and the difference between your drug and Dr. Longo? I suppose it could be framed in the context of neuroprotection, but I'll let you have a go at that.
Sure. So our drug is very unique. It's the only one that hits a particular receptor known as sigma-2. And so in that sense, it's different from Frank's drug. I think it is part of this broad approach with multiple mechanisms being targeted for Alzheimer's disease. So I think it's very good. I think addressing the fundamental pathologies that we see in Alzheimer's disease through a variety of mechanisms is ultimately what's going to solve the disease.
Thank you. We have another question from the audience, which we get a lot, I think all of us, and that is, how can screening patients, like doing this blood test, we've learned, and from the brain scan that ADDF helped to develop also, we've learned that the disease starts 20 years before symptoms, and a lot of people feel that there's nothing you can do, and why bother getting the blood test in the preclinical stage or even in the earliest stages of memory problems. But I have to say, I know all of us know that we've learned a lot about prevention of Alzheimer's, Mia Kiva-Pelto's work. Charlotte, do you want to comment on the value of early detection using blood tests for enabling people to get into prevention, and what could be done, what can really be done in terms of prevention and slowing the progress of Alzheimer's with early diagnosis?
Yes, for now, we don't have a drug. That's what we're all aware of. But it's so important to have blood tests to develop those drugs. And so now we don't have these drugs to allow prevention. But when the trials of Susan will be finished, hopefully we have a nice drug to work with. In terms of prevention, people also know that there is something to gain in lifestyle and some other risk factors. So aging is a risk factor, you can't help that. But there are other risk factors, like a healthy lifestyle is very good for your brain as well. So those are things that you can work with yourself already. So just keep in mind what's good for your heart is also good for your brain.
Yes, and that was validated recently by the Lancet Commission and some other work that showed that with lifestyle intervention and healthy lifestyles and controlling diabetes and hypertension, we might be able to prevent up to 40% of the cases. So there's really good evidence now on prevention and the value of early screening, I think, to enable people to really get seriously into a prevention mode. Another question we have from the audience is, are there similarities with diseases like HIV/AIDS, where we might need a cocktail of drugs to help treat symptoms? And I think the parallel question to that is, we've seen a lot of interest recently in the role of potentially infectious diseases like viruses and so on in the disease. So 2 questions, I guess. Maybe I can ask Jerry on this one. What do you think about the inevitability or the future of a cocktail of drugs for Alzheimer's disease like we have in cancer and HIV?
I completely agree. I really don't think that we're going to find the one silver bullet that's going to be a single drug that's going to be able to treat this disease. There's so many aspects to the pathology as far as, A beta, tau pathology, neuroinflammation, as you mentioned, infectious diseases. And I really do think that we're going to have to target all of those aspects of the pathology in order to be successful in finding a cure.
Yep. Okay, great. Another question about clinical trials, Susan, is that there's many ongoing trials. Is there enough access to trials for patients who are interested? And I'm reminded on that less than 5% of people with Alzheimer's disease actually participate in clinical trials today, not much different than actually cancer. And we also have lots of registries and things like that. Susan, could you comment on access to trials and how hard it is to enroll patients and so on?
Sure. This is a major challenge that all of us face in developing these drugs for clinical trials. I think, folks have access to information on clinicaltrials.gov and the other registries that can point folks in that direction. There's a lot of information available online to allow folks to literally get in touch with the folks at the given clinical trial site. And so I would encourage everyone listening to help us get the word out, help us let patients know that there are experimental therapies out there that are options for them, and just raise the awareness that participation in these trials is absolutely crucial to finding those breakthroughs.
Yeah, and an exciting thing, another sort of breaking news issue here is that on November 6th, which I think is next Friday, we're going to have an FDA advisory committee meeting on aducanumab, which is the name of a drug that Biogen is bringing to market, or trying to bring to market, and hopefully has a reasonable chance, we don't know. And this is an anti-amyloid drug, and we know over the years that most or all of the anti-amyloid drugs have failed, but this one succeeded. And I'm very proud to say that one of the reasons that it succeeded is because ADDF invested in another biomarker, which many of you have heard me speak about, which was the PET amyloid scan, which for the first time Biogen actually used the Amyvid scan that ADDF helped to develop to enroll patients, to facilitate enrollment in the trial, and then to use that scan to show that the drug aducanumab actually worked to do what it was supposed to do, which was to remove the plaques. And the question for the advisory committee is whether removing the plaques with aducanumab, as measured by the ADDF-developed PET scan, actually improves clinical status of patients and slows the rate of decline of the illness over an 18-month period. So tune in next week because it's really going to be exciting. I think we're going to have some of the public data released on November 4th and then the advisory committee on November 6th. And if we get a good review on the advisory committee, aducanumab could be the first drug approved as a disease-modifying agent for Alzheimer's disease in the history of human beings, and the first new drug approved for Alzheimer's disease since 2003, which is, I think if my arithmetic is right, about 18 years ago. So it could be next week, could be a really exciting week in our field if it gets approved, and there's huge implications of this drug for the field in so many different ways. We have another question, a clinical question. Asked Charlotte, what's the difference between early onset Alzheimer's disease and Alzheimer's that develops in later life? And I think what they mean here, because those are confusing terms, is maybe familial Alzheimer's disease and sporadic Alzheimer's disease, but maybe you could also talk about, when we talk about early onset, maybe sometimes people confuse that with the stage of illness that people are diagnosed at.
Yes, thank you for that question. Familial Alzheimer's disease is caused by some very specific genes, and that occurs in 1% of all patients. So the majority has sporadic Alzheimer's disease. But even within the sporadic Alzheimer's disease population, we do see patients that have an earlier onset than others. And our center is especially specialized in those early onset or relatively young Alzheimer's disease patients. And we do see that their onset is below age 60. and probably their pathology is still not that mixed as it is in more later life. So there are some differences in those relatively young patients that already get Alzheimer's at a relatively young age compared to those that develop disease later. But from the pathological viewpoint, with respect to the involvement of amyloid and tau, we do think that it's the same pathology in younger Alzheimer patients compared to the older patients.
Right, and I guess maybe genetics plays a role there. For our last question, the question is, what is kind of a technical question? What is the role of microglial activation in synaptic destruction? But I'm going to reframe it and ask Jerry to tell us her view on what is the role of inflammation in the brain in Alzheimer's disease, and maybe what can we do to try to control that. There are several clinical trials going on now with anti-neuroinflammatories, actually, that ADDF is supporting.
Right. Yeah, there's an expansion in the field for looking for neuroinflammation markers and as well as treatments, because what we've realized, for several decades, we always thought that, our brain was able to, keep this inflammation out. And we found, that there's significant amount of evidence to suggest that, there's a great deal of inflammation in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. And as a result, that information then translates into the death of these neurons or these cells in the brain that are essential for learning and memory. And so targeting that neuroinflammation and blocking it and reducing it in any way is going to be extremely beneficial, I think, for the field. And as you mentioned, Howard, there are multiple trials to try to reduce the inflammation in the brain. And people, just as far as even taking anti-inflammatory drugs that are over the counter, aspirin and things like that, there's been some evidence that there can be some beneficial effects of that. And so I think that the support that the ADDF is giving towards advancing these specific type drugs is going to have a huge impact on the field moving forward.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank all of you for a terrific panel today and for your participation with ADDF in moving our research forward and ultimately finding a cure and getting rid of this nightmare to our world. So thank you very much. And to the audience, I hope you'll enjoy the rest of our wonderful fall luncheon. Thank you very much for listening. And bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Every year, we present the Charles Evans Award to honor exceptional leadership in support of Alzheimer's research. This year's award will be presented to Larry Leeds, a dear friend of Mr. Evans and an outstanding supporter and advocate for Alzheimer's research. It is now my honor to introduce ADDF board members and creators of the award, Bonnie Pfeiffer Evans and Alice Shore.
Charles was my big brother, and he lit up every room he walked into. He was really just a joyful personality. Everything he touched turned to gold. He was in many different businesses. His first huge success was Evan Picone. After that, he went into the real estate business, and then he went into the movie business. And lo and behold, the first movie he produced was Tootsie.
Charles was a man of honor, very distinguished, very handsome, honest, hardworking, and dedicated to the things he believed in.
My father's mother had Alzheimer's. It wasn't called Alzheimer's. Nobody knew what it was. It was called senile dementia, as was my father's illness when he first showed signs of it.
Charles's main focus was Alzheimer's. It was a family situation. He wanted to do something. He wanted to help desperately. Alice and I were really excited to establish the Charles Evans Award for ADDF.
This is the 10th anniversary of the Charles Evans ADDF Award, and it couldn't come at a more exciting time. If my brother could only see the progress that's been made in this short period of time, he'd be over the moon, because he really spent so much time and effort and money hoping to make this happen.
Selecting an honoree each year for the Charles Evans Award is really a labor of love. And this year, love had a lot to do with it.
We are thrilled to be giving the Charles Evans Award to Larry Leeds. Larry loved Charles, and he has been incredibly generous and supportive of our work at ADDF.
Larry Leeds makes the perfect Charles Evans recipient. Business icon, philanthropist, and just phenomenal human being.
We are so fortunate to have Larry's generosity, his energy, his network, and his wisdom.
He's just totally authentic. That's what I was going to say. I think his devotion to philanthropy is really pure.
It brings him joy to make people happy. It really demonstrates that there are people in the world that understand blessings that they've gotten and want to use those blessings to benefit others.
If Larry doesn't mind, I'd like to say he's 91 years old. He's the icon and the vision of a future where we live to be 90 or 100 or even more, and we're healthy and we're active and we're funny and we're sociable and we love life. And that's Larry.
There was a song in the 1980s called Sharp Dressed Man, and it must have been written about Larry. And I think Larry was an influencer before it was a buzzword or a profession.
He's more energetic than people half his age in general, but when he believes in a cause, there's no stopping him.
Larry's also unique for me personally because he's lucky. He doesn't have people in his family with Alzheimer's disease, and yet he's joined the cause. And I really respect that because he recognizes the importance of this, not just to his own family ultimately, or even to himself, but to the world.
Larry, thank you for being such a great friend all these years. Thank you for your guidance, your mentorship, your spirit, and your passion. Larry, I love you.
You're an outstanding member of the community, and I am so happy that you are actively participating even after your 90th birthday. And as I've told you, I intend to live to 114, and except for the 4 or 5 years difference that we have, I hope you'll be there right to the end with me.
Larry, growing up, I remember very well hearing my father say, "I've known that man for 50 years, and think to myself, that's impossible. But here I am, saluting you, a friend of 75 years. And I do remind you of the advice I give to people who are dear friends of mine who are 90. And the advice is, when you bend down to tie your shoes, make a list of some other things to do while you're down there." Congratulations, my dear pal.
We're so proud of you, Larry.
Thank you. The Charles Evans Award. Well, Charles, you must be turning over in your grave when you think that your doubles opponent is receiving this trophy and you're not receiving it. But I thank you so much for all you've done. It's really terrific, and I wouldn't be getting this, and this luncheon wouldn't be this way without the groundwork that you laid. I am honored, I'm flattered, I'm humbled. This is a lovely moment in my life, and I'm dedicating myself, and I hope all of you will too, to be of great further assistance in furthering this wonderful cause of ADDF and what we're trying to achieve. Please help us as much as you can, and thank you for honoring me.
Now more than ever, we depend on your generosity to turn today's hope into the innovative treatments we're anticipating. We hope you will consider making a donation by texting ADDF to 243-725. 100% of your donation goes directly towards science. Thank you again to all of you who made this event possible, and a special thanks to all of our participants who graciously shared their reasons for hope. Without your groundbreaking work and support, none of this would be possible. Please stay safe and healthy, and thanks for joining us.